Hello and welcome to NE1's Mental Health Podcast with me, Ray Elliott, and my good mate and demi-Geordie, Sam Warner. Got any more Geordie words for us, Sam Warner?
Well, I didn't want to get into it.
Sam's been learning Geordie at the gym off some old fella in the sauna, allegedly. We're absolutely delighted to be joined by Mike. Guest Mike, thank you so much for coming down to see us. Just put us through our paces, and like I was saying, I was trying to think of how I was going to introduce you because you're a man that wears many hats, wearing a beanie today, in fact. But I'm thinking photographer, cinematographer, adventurer, foundation expert, man aquatic. I'm running out. Yeah, I'll let you go for it, mate. You explain to us what it is you do, who you are.
My current guys, or the current things that I'm doing at the moment, is making a living out of pushing buttons on cameras with photography and cinematography. And I have started to teach foundation training, so not an expert yet, but I get to learn and work with a wonderful woman called Maura McGovern, who looked after me and basically helped me with all my chronic back issues. And went to go and learn to do that. But in the past, I've been a chef. I've worked in corporate incentives, and so chaperoning people around the Alps for these kind of conferences. I worked as an audiovisual lighting technician, so sound, lights, projection, more forklifts. And there's probably a few more in there that I've forgotten about. And then during lockdown, all my work kind of died, and I ended up working on film and TV sets as a forklift driver for the construction department, which was great. Just me cruising with my speaker, forklifting away. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of an idea about what I do.
Wow. Do you want to paint the scene about what Mike's just put us through our paces for the last hour?
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Well, so we mentioned it a little bit there, but foundational training, which I've just learned about, literally my body's just learned about, amazing, and we're going to get right into that. But so you just took us through, Mike, some kind of fast track sort of basics of the fundamentals of the training. Tell us more, because my body's got like a hum at the moment. Is yours?
Yeah, like my back is taut.
Yeah. I feel like we just kind of did like a speed dating version of it. we fired right in there. But to take it back to the basics, and again, I want to say that I am no expert at this, but I've gone and learned it. I've practiced it for 4 years, and I was just out in the States kind of doing my qualification. But basically what I was teaching you guys to do was make length and space in your body by placing us into these positions and using this breathing technique, this decompression breathing, to then kind of traction and pull and make that space in that lower back, and kind of try and give us far more mobile rib cages. And so what we sort of did was some of the floor exercises and the standing exercises, and both of you guys suffer from a really classic kind of lower back, same that I had. Mine was right side, turned into sciatica. It was debilitating. And it can be really, really painful, really irritating. And out of all of the things that I have found, personally for me, this is what works. I can do it 10, 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 7 if I'm feeling like a good schoolboy. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just feeling better, and I'm constantly making more length and space. So I guess we used to stretch in a single muscle, but now let's think about lengthening whole chains of muscles, lengthening and strengthening, and then using that breath to create even more space. And that's basically what we did.
It's so interesting because, like you say, I've experienced a bad back in my early 20s. I was working as a builder, and I used to do a lot of boxing as well when I was younger, and it seemed to be that twisting motion. And I was in the gym one. I'll never forget the day, and I got that shooting pain. You'll have felt it, the sciatica. And it started off in the ankle, actually, and then it was in the knee, but then it really developed in the back. And I remember thinking at the time, and I say this as part of the talks I go around doing it in construction, that I had, a lot of people have a bit of a chip on the shoulder in their early 20s, but I had never experienced an injury, so I just thought, you know what, I'll be absolutely grand come Monday, I'll have a quiet weekend. And it just wasn't going away. And, working in construction with a bad back's not the dream. But I didn't realise, and rather naively, having went through that, I'm just now understanding how much your physical health is linked to your mental health, because that was when I first experienced poor mental health, was following that injury, because it took away my ability to run, go to the gym. You know, I was in constant pain, like varying degrees, but like it was always there. And I don't think I realized just the impact it had. And even looking back now, I'm like, whoa, you know, I should have really got that seen to. And you just, there's a thing about, I don't know if it's men in construction, it's just like, yeah, we'll just trudge on, we'll just work through the pain, you know. But it's not just the pain in your back, it's impacting every part of your life. And I'd seen a massive change. And it's only now that I'm looking into all these ways of making my body stronger, healing these wounds from the past, which are essentially helping with my mental health as well. It's all linked.
Yeah, this intrinsic link, and I think it was very similar for me. And again, that kind of goes back to the lockdown time for me, where I have spent the best part of my working life. I will be 44 this year, and I started working self-employed, I think, when I was 19. I've constantly been on the move, and I've never really stopped. There would be times I would stop, but the times I would stop is when my back went out. Then my back would go out, and my mental health would drop. I'd just feel like shit because I couldn't do the things, and I couldn't keep the movement that would satiate this mind, that would satiate my need for dopamine.
Yeah.
And I think that pain, like it kills my creativity.
Yeah.
I think it probably for me, and I was realizing it because one of my best mates is an osteopath, and I met him going to go and see him, and I thought, shit, I've known you like 15 years. So that means by the time I went to see you, I'd obviously been suffering for a bit, and then I decided to do something about it. But then I've still carried on going back to him, getting patched up, him telling me I needed to do something to deal with us regularly so that he doesn't have to patch me back up. And he's like, I love you. I'll keep patching you back up. I wish you would do something. And so actually he is who introduced me to Maura, who taught me foundation training. They did a skill exchange as an osteopath and a foundation training teacher. And he just said, I think this is for you. And I did some sessions with her and it got better and I'm fine. Stopped doing it again. Things got worse again. Got back to it. Things got worse again. And this pattern repeated and repeated until lockdown. And I had one of the darkest, deepest kind of lows of my life. I hit the bottom of the barrel. Everything in my life felt like it fell apart. And from that point, my body started to feel like it was falling apart. And I ended up with this horrendous wake up in the middle of the night, stabbing pain like through the back, that sciatica that if you're listening, you know about. You're like, oh my God, what happened? Someone's put an ice pick in there. Like, I could hardly go to the toilet for the first week. I was out my face on painkillers that they prescribed me, and I didn't really know what to do. And so this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks until I went, foundation training. Called Maura. How's it going? It's really bad. Help. She's like, no worries. Within a week, 2 sessions, the sciatica has not gone, but that searing pain has gone, and I can sleep again. I don't need to take the pharmaceutical painkillers. Problem, been on them for a few months, not easy to get off. And what had happened was really in quite a quick amount of time, I'd ended up with a bit of a dependence on them. And making that transition out of that, whilst trying to get out of the pain, like that was challenging. And that whole period of my life was really interesting. It was like I literally hit a brick wall at speed. And I guess from that point, where are we now? Like 4 years down the line, I kind of lost track. I've been kind of patching it back together, trying to work out like what's going on. How can I manage all these different things on a kind of day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic around sort of painkillers and pharmaceutical drugs, because the more I'm speaking to a lot of people recently where they're really opening their eyes to alternative therapies for pain, for the mental health, for the well-being. And I think for a long, I would say it sort of peaked around the 80s, didn't it, where pharmaceuticals became quite popular for, curing all ills, didn't it? And I think we're still suffering from that hangover, but I think people are realizing now that there's actually a lot you can do outside of that, not just going straight for the packet of painkillers or this or that, and diet, stretches, cold water. There's a lot we can be doing.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean we have to go
super
down
interesting, and that brings me to a question I wanted to ask Mike. So that you're referring to there, we're sort of coming right now round to the idea of like, well, hang on a minute, before I go and get the pills or whatever it might be, the surgery, like how are we living our foundations of our lives. You know, how is our sleep and how is our diet, and are we getting out in the sun, and are we in reciprocal sort of nurturing relationships, and all of these things that like you never get asked when you go and sit in your 7-minute window with a GP. So it's called foundational training
or foundation training.
Foundation training. So for me is how I've never heard of this. Where's it come from? How long's it been around? What's the inception? Whose ideas, and how has it sort of evolved? And
yeah, it's this gentleman called Eric Goodman, who's from the States. I believe he's Florida, where he harks from. He was and is still a chiropractor, I believe. I don't believe he practices the chiropractic. He just teaches the foundation training, and he was suffering from a debilitating lower back issue and was investigating all these different positions. And I think it was might be 15 years old, maybe 10 years that it really started to push it out to people. And I'm not quite sure on the time scale. And he has just constantly developed this and evolves it so that every video you see him put up, he's changed something, and he's happily will tell you, look, I'm keep evolving this. And I think that's what I really like about Eric and all the core educators and people that teach you, is that they're all was constantly tweaking because things change, bodies change, ideas change. But he just had this fundamental belief in how this body works. And again, you know, with Maura, who I've been working with and work with now teaching it, again, she's evolved it for her way and her style of doing things, for men, for women. You know, it really can fit into all sort of walks of life. What's really cool over there is that a lot of them, I think Jesse and Evan were firefighters. In fact, one of them still is. They've integrated it into the San Diego firefighting department. So when I was speaking to Sandy, your last guest, and he's now training to be a fireman, I was explaining how they've been using it in San Diego. And, you know, it's also not just, yes, it's this biomechanics, and yes, it's this thing where we're making length and strength in space, but we're concentrating so hard on all those little things I was telling you that you're forgetting about the rest of the stuff that's going on. You're breathing deeply. You're just focused on that thing. So I find when I finish it, feeling pretty chilled out as well, which is why people like yoga or Pilates or any modality, I believe the name. I'd love to find another word. I struggle with that word.
being present, you become present, don't you, in that moment?
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I went to the doctors all those years ago with the sciatica, they gave me one of these belts, and it's sort of, you could adjust the elastic on each side. So essentially what it was doing is it was drawing your hips in. So what you've just done there is pretty much the opposite. It was trying to open thing, which makes sense. If you're looking to release something, you want to be trying to opening and widthening and lengthening, you know, muscles and structures. So I was doing the exact opposite for so long.
Squashing it.
Yeah, but essentially I was squashing it in, you know, and because that's what I've been told at the doctors. Maybe it's just they didn't know enough about it or what have you, but it never did put it right. I had to do loads of different lifestyle changes, which were pretty drastic at the time. But even just doing that, you know, that short session we had there, I could feel exactly what you were trying to achieve. That, you know, even my posture, like I mentioned to you, I've over the years with having various injuries, I felt like my postures I've you know, tensed up and sort of curled over around the shoulders, and you sort of rolled shoulders, and it's trying to get out those habits of a lifetime. And I find that with meditating as well. You know, if I'm sitting and I start meditating, you do the sort of body scan, don't you? And I'm always sat there, I'm just like this ball of stress, and then I'm like, oh, actually, I can let go of my shoulders, and you know, my jaw's tense, and you do the scan all through your body, and I'm thinking, if I'm sitting there like that on a daily basis, it's no wonder everything's
tight.
Tight and
I think that's a really interesting point. And to go a little bit back, there is Moore always talks about sowing seeds, because there's 1,000,001 things that you can do for your body. There's 1,000,001 podcasts. There's so much information. And so with the foundation training thing, she's been teaching me to sow seeds and not just bulldoze in there. And one of those seed sowers is someone with lower back, like you guys, give you that foot position, give you that little hinge, give you a little breathing space. Oh, wow. You feel the relief in your lower back and you want to know more. And then I can teach you more. I think I have to be careful with pushing it too hard in a way, because I'm like, oh, it could really fix you, it could really help you. And I'm again with Maura, she's like, sow the seeds, Mike. And I'm like, do the little things. Someone comes back to you. You know, I was down the local veggie shop and my mate Robbie that runs a veggie shop was like, that stuff you keep putting up, my lower back's killing me, man. I was like, I could come in next week, trade you for a couple of carrots and a few tomatoes and that, you know. But yeah, so, and then to go into, and I think it's important to say that, like, you know, the medical industry is amazing for what it does. They have a massive amount on their plate, and for things to become regular and standardized within the medical world can take like 10 years. I was out surfing talking to some guy about ACL reconstructions, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm a biomechanic, limb designer. I was like, wow. I was like, what's coming? And he said, in 10 years, like, it's going to be amazing, but it's going to take 10 years to get it in. So it takes a long time for all this stuff to filter down, and hopefully it will start to move into it, because there's a lot of people that have back surgery that you wonder if they didn't have to have it. Yeah. And again, to sort of go back to that part of like, I'm 44 and it took me like till I was 40 to properly pull my finger out my arse and do some of these things. But it took a really shit, low, horrible experience of this deep low. Do I wish it had happened? Well, I almost, yes, because if it wouldn't, I might not have become a bit more conscious. And I was speaking with me and Maura yesterday, we're chatting and we were talking about, well, what happened? When does that click? And what is that word? Because there's 1,000,001 words in the space of looking after yourself. And I can find it quite tricky to use the right word, but having hit such a low and to have come back from it with the help from my friends, with really good counselling that I've had to pay for, admittedly, yes, stopping drinking, all these different bits that work for me, I feel a bit more conscious. I think before that, I was connected to nature. I surfed, I skied, I did all these things. I probably had quite an extractive relationship with nature. I wanted it. I needed it. It's going to fix me. It's going to help me. I want to get a buzz out of it. I'm not going to lie. I probably still go out and do that. But with that and this kind of consciousness of like, not even about what's around me in the world, but the consciousness of what's going on within me and what's causing this like swirl. And so I guess it's good to probably explain that for me, dyslexia has been in my life since I was in primary 4. They found out early. And then I've realized in the last 4 years that ADHD or ADD or whatever name we want to give it is something that's been ruling me. And again, they're intrinsically linked with the back pain, with the emotional stuff. And I think we were talking about this, which I really liked. Someone said this to me recently. It was like, there's potentially like 7-8 types of ADHD or ADD. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Maybe there's 100. If I'm an 8 and I've got the manual for number 2, how do I understand how to use this precision tool, as I like to think of it? And some people talk about the gift, and I know that doesn't work for everyone, because if you're in the center of it, just feels like hell. Yeah. But I do believe it's a tool. I do think that's what it is, but I need the right manual, and I need to write my own manual. But how do you do that?
I think that's a really interesting comment, and we can really dig into that because it is something that really interests me. And I think there is a lot of case studies, and they're looking a lot more into neurodiversity at the moment. It's a big topic, and we're really undergunned to sort of manage it, which is my concern. But I would like to ask how that sort of neurodiversity or the ADHD showed itself, or showed up when you were younger. Talk about maybe growing up. How did that sort of represent? Did it come out in a physical aspect? Was it more hyperactivity, or when did you sort of notice, or did you know it was a thing when you were younger, or is it just something that you've really cottoned on to when in your 40s, or did you actually?
I was really lucky in that sense that my mum clicked on at whatever primary 4, you'd be like 7 maybe, 4th year of school, of primary school.
So you're growing up in Scotland?
Growing up in Scotland, I grew up in Edinburgh, and my mum would literally have to tear me out of the car, kicking and screaming. Hated it, broke her heart to do that. And I just, from I have no conscious memory of that period of my life. It starts to come in on your last year of primary school a bit, but I still don't know if those memories are memories that I've been told or if I actually remember it. And like, I'm not trying to paint some like huge picture of trauma. I just had a super shit time. I didn't understand what was going on. I couldn't learn the way the other kids were learning, but my mum was like, kid's smart, but something's up. And they got me tested and they found out that was I was dyslexic. And then I got really lucky and got to go to a school that had a specific dyslexic department, and it's called the Cabin. And then you'd go into this cabin, and it was like this space we're in, a bit bigger. And there was people from 6th year to 1st year. It's like, oh, this is my people.
Yeah.
All right. It was like a crew of loonies. And I mean that in the most respectable fashion. It was like loads of great characters who ultimately, if we looked down the line, I would love to see where they're all
Where they are now.
man. And I know what some of them are
I bet
doing.
you they're creatives. And,
Visionaries, doing all sorts of stuff. And I'm not, it sounds like I'm blowing sunshine up our arses here, but there's some really dynamic individuals, but doing everything, not just artist or whatever. But so that happened at that age. School was a war for me. It was probably a war for my teachers. I'm so sorry to them. But there was one guy that was amazing to me, computing teacher Dave, taught me how to climb. He's one of those guys that threw a carrot to me because he saw something and he was like, this kid's got something, like, I want to help you. So he helped me, tutored me after school. He taught me how to lead climb. That was like that. I'll teach you to lead climb if you pull your finger out and get your computing degree.
So that's an interesting concept, because he's looked at a physical aspect. So were you quite a hyperactive student, would you say?
I don't think I was like overly hyperactive, and I think that's maybe a bit of that common misconception, because some people are, but not everyone presents with that hyperactivity element. Yeah. But I was fidgety and irritable. Yeah.
Because I was very much like that. And for me, it was when I found football at the age of 6. It just, I get really obsessive about things, but I was never without a football. And getting that, physical activity out of me, and even if I was just going to shops, I had the ball kicking off the wall, going down the streets, and that really was a turning point with my behaviour. And weirdly, just before that, the school had pulled my mum in and said, look, I think, Ray's got issues with concentration and maybe behavioural issues. We think he's got ADHD. And ironically, my nickname was RADHD of some sort of kid. And I look back and I think, absolutely brilliant nickname.
Got to have a
epic.
There we go.
But yeah, and I tell that story, but my mum at the time was like, absolutely not. He's not going to see anybody. He just, certain subjects aren't for him. And my mum worked in the school as well, so I don't know if it was a bit of saving face and she didn't want to admit. I don't know, looking back on it. But it wasn't until I was in my 30s and you start doing your own research, and that the things that used to show up in my physical activity, were now, it was very much the way my brain was working and the way my thought process was. And I thought, right, maybe the joke really was on me, the ADHD. There might be something in this. And then when you start looking at it and how it affects me now, and getting back to that comment about, a lot of people say, oh, ADHD, it's a superpower, it's this, it's that. And I firmly believe, like you say, if you know what you're dealing with and you've got the right toolkit, you can harness the powers of certain things. And I can do that. We talked about the hyper focus. I know if I want to get something done and I hit that hyper focus, I speak to my wife and I'm like, I've just got to go with this. Just let us go. And then she'll pull us out though when it's getting a bit, where I'm getting close to burnout with something. So you can harness it in the right way. But when I didn't know about it, it didn't feel like a superpower. I felt it was just debilitating because I couldn't concentrate, couldn't get anything done, and it would show up in ways that I didn't understand then, I do now. So I think that narrative around certain neurodiverse traits being superpowers, like you say, if you're aware of them and your level of awareness and your understanding, you can harness them in certain directions. But if you're not, I mean, even in some aspects, if you do know about them, it's still not all sunshine and rainbows, is it?
I'd like to ask you,
Yeah.
Mike, just while we're on it. So when you said you moved to the school that was a bit more specialised, and there was an age range within that school, within your group, how did you find that experience? How did they cater to you? Did they find those things that you were more passionate about, that you were more suited to? And were you separated off into age groups again, or were you still in the group with an older guy and a younger guy? And
yeah, so a bit more context, and that probably helpful is that. So that was in the secondary school, and it was this part of the school where you went for extra help, and so they had learning support teachers there, fantastic woman Katrina and this guy David Lyons and a bunch of others, and so certain classes, like, they were trying to teach me French. Come on. I had to convince them, like, I think that's a bad idea. Could I go and have some more English comprehension classes?
I'd like to hear the Scottish take on the French accent. Actually, can you recall any of this?
Like, not that none. Like, I can do accents. I used to be brilliant at accents. Like, completely convince people I was from another country. But it was sort of illogical. So even in that place and even in that school, 80s and 90s. Even though they had that, there were still teachers within that school that were not believers in the fact that this needs help. But it felt amazing. Like, that sense of, like, I remember the Hall twins. I'll never forget these guys. They were my cousin's mates. And I'm a bit cheeky. I know that, right? I can push buttons, and I was pretty good at pushing buttons. And I got in a bit of trouble, and I was having a bit of issues. And then I just went and spoke to the Hall twins. 6 foot something, basketball playing, blondies. I was like, got a bit of an issue, and they're like, have you been? I was like, being a bit of a dick, yeah. They sorted someone out. No one was punched, but it's like, don't mess with Mike. He's part of the gang. And I was like, yeah, got my people. And there's something about that, like that community of people, or the people you resonate with. And I think we touched on it earlier, and I touched on it with Sandy, is that, like, ever since I met Sandy, there's a buzz to that guy. And I like that. And that buzz is because we're into the same things. And I do believe it's because we're kind of buzzing on a similar frequency with that neurodivergence. And I think I'm probably guilty of using that term of the kind of neurodivergence as superpowers, because at the same time, that really helped me think, I've got something, I just need to learn how to use it. But the older I get and the more I get into these conversations, I realize that could feel really hard to someone, but like, screw you,
struggling
with your superpower. Like, I'm struggling because the anxiety can feel so overwhelming to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. Yeah. Like, to the point where I can't do my job as a photographer. I'm sat there on a shoot, and I'm looking at my fist, and it's so white. Like, I'm just gripping this thing, and the anxiety and the fear and the self-worth is all, like, buzzing around. Like, I need to be here. I need to take this shot. And it still can get me. Like, I have not mastered this. Year in, year out, things will roll around, and I'll get sidelined, or like I'll burn out, because when you get into this state, and it's this really heightened kind of, I call it tired, wired, and inspired. And I'm currently in one of those states.
I can absolutely level with that. Yeah. Tired, wired, and inspired. Yeah.
And for me, that means my sleeping kind of goes to crap, and I'm at 3:30. Last week it was at 1:30.
Wow.
And hopefully I'll push back to 4:30. Like, 4:30, I'm totally cool with. I go to bed by 8, 9 in the night. I've done enough during the day. It's time to finish. The world needs me to shut up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I kind of lost my train of thought there. But yeah, there's how do you manage it?
The idea of it being a superpower, and actually the reality that you still face the anxieties and the difficulties, as well as you understand it now, it doesn't necessarily take away the potency of, like, that and debilitating energy of it.
Yeah, and that awareness, like, again, by kind of making your own checklist of what's going on, and having people, like, having a partner and friends that know when to pull you out.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's key. And not everyone has that. But if you can develop that relationship with people, that's also key to it, because there's gold to be had in here, but you need help to kind of corral the energy. I remember with Adam, whenever he would, like, put his hands on my head as a cranial osteopath. And he's like, wow, he's like pretty buzzy, like a beehive in here at the moment. And I was like, oh, I've got to like get rid of the bees, or you got to smoke them out, chill them out. Substances, sport, adrenaline, feeding the dopamine, all that kind of stuff. And now the more I think, oh, actually, is it more about like finding a pattern and a rhythm for that? How can I do that with meditation or foundation training into meditation or something?
Did you find that when you found out about the ADHD at 40, did you look back at a lot of situations? I imagine, like you say, chasing that dopamine. I've been in that situation down various avenues, and you look back on certain times of your life and you think, oh, yeah, maybe that was the driver.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Had I known, maybe it's that whole.
You'd have zigged when you should have.
I maybe zagged at that crossroads, but I just didn't have the ability at the time. But I think, like you're saying, where you're chasing dopamine now because you're very much into your adventure sports, diving, surfing, traveling around the world, seeking these buzzes. And I think it's fabulous. And I think those are the type of things, if you're aware that you are getting the dopamine and the adrenaline buzz from that, I think they're the things you've got to cling on to. Whereas you can easily go down the other path of the unhealthy fixes, I suppose. And that's a big thing for me. And I've realized that in the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and it was actually sitting in a therapist room, and like the parting words were, "You've got to keep surfing." And I'm like, I couldn't actually believe he was saying it. It was because I was just thinking, what? That's just like my hobby. And he said, "Oh no, he said, you don't realize how much you going into the North Sea, getting your fix, getting that buzz, is doing for you." Your overall well-being, your relationship,
satiating your kind of.
And I come home and I spoke to my wife about it, and she was like, oh, "Absolutely, Ray." She says, "When you get in from a surf," she's like, "Don't get us wrong, I don't like you going out for 2 hours," and and that was another story. But she's like, "You come back, and I love that, Ray." She's like, "You're absolutely buzzing for hours, sometimes days," and she's like, "I don't ever want you to lose that," and I've not had a buzz off any, and I think we've said this in a previous pod, I've not had a buzz off anything that's man-made or chemical that matches the surfing or the I think we've gone into free diving a little bit, and those buzzes being in nature and like healthy, addictive,
yeah, totally. And that's the thing, isn't it? Healthy addictions. I have also had to address my relationship with surfing or freediving, because when I can't have those, so for instance, before lockdown I was on tour with a clothing brand and we were traveling around Europe working, and there wasn't a chance, like we might have been at ski fields or we might have been at surf beaches and you'd get the odd surf, but these are like 6-month periods where I'm driving, I'm shooting, I'm editing, and I'm in a new hotel room every 2 days. And that was hard. I was like, I can't have the thing that fixes me. But with my pal Adam, I was like, call me when you're going for a surf. Like, call me the night before, let's froth out. Yeah. Calls me at 6 when he's driving down, like, oh, it's going to be good. I'm looking at the boy weather and I'm in Switzerland or wherever I am. And he's like, then he calls me afterwards. Was it good? He's like, sucks. I'm like, boo. And not like, oh, yay, I didn't get it. So sort of living vicariously through that pal of mine, but learning for me to detach from that a bit. And I think a process that helped me with that was during lockdown, I ended up going out and shooting every morning with my camera at the blue hour, so the hour before dawn, which was inspired by a friend of mine, Nick Pumphrey, Cornish photographer, who on a call at the end of May was like, I'm going to go down, shoot every morning, edit some photos, put them up. Like, loads of people can't get to the sea. I need this. I'm freaking out. It was like, at this point, I'm like 4 beers down. It's 11 a.m. I'm like, look, great idea. But genuinely, like, I need that.
Yeah.
I'd started doing some therapy, and I was talking to someone doing some ACT therapy, which was really helpful, action commitment therapy.
Right.
And I was also speaking to someone on a kind of more like, I guess we could say, spiritual side of things, like exploring that yogic look that isn't just yoga that we see in the Western world. And I went out and I shot every single morning, and I took photos. I came back and I wrote about it, and I wrote about my feelings. And when I look back at it, I'm like, wow, I literally published my journal and it was all my intimate thoughts about what was going on, why I was thinking these things. And so I had this reaction that I've still never had to date or ever before, where I was becoming really conscious of myself by being in the ocean. Now that became addictive. That became addictive for two reasons, because I was enjoying the cold water, I'm in my wetsuit, I'm enjoying the routine, but maybe I was starting to enjoy the reaction that I was getting from people. Like genuinely, I was doing it not for clicks and likes, because I was getting these messages from other guys and girls and people around the world going, man, I can't get out. That video you did today was hilarious. Or that was so mellow, I just put that on repeat. Or my friend Barry, I know it wasn't Barry, it was someone, they were like, oh, me and my girlfriend just had a bath and watched week 1 of Dawn Days on repeat. And it was just these like vibey little videos, and I had friends give me music, and we were just creating this thing and just giving it out to the world. But it was giving me a ton, because I was having this really peaceful time, but I felt like I was doing something for other people at a time where it was just shit.
This is an amazing point that we've almost alluded to in every chat that we've had, and it's about, you know, a sense of community, a connection, nature, and giving back. These tend to be fundamentals that we end up talking about in every single chat.
They're so simple, they're always there, and the chaos and the confusion, and as again another thing we mentioned, just the constant information overload now. And I like what you alluded to there, Mike, even that kind of feeling when you might even get addicted to the dopamine of that return. That's something I've battled with. You know, I previously did a podcast, you know all about it, Ray. You came on the podcast, and I loved it. And I still love sitting down like this, and it was a video podcast, and I was getting great feedback, and it was growing. But then I caught myself in the analytics, and I should use this keyword and call it this instead of that, because that's going to garner this. And then I had a real battle with like, oh God. And I think I noticed it more in the physical world when, Daddy, we're going to go. And I'm like, hey, I've just got to edit this. I'm just, you know, looking for a keyword for this hashtag, whatever it was. And I can remember thinking to myself, God, you know, I could see myself sort of doing a great thing here in what I call kind of the underworld, like the upside down, the digital realm, where I've got this whole other thing, but I'm kind of swimming away from this family and life I've got in the physical world. And I sort of made a little pact with myself, like, well, I'm going to just keep having these conversations and keep the conversation going, but I'm just going to focus it in my physical real world.
Yeah.
And kind of really for me, quite radical to sort of make that change. And then stepping back in now with Ray, doing NE1's mental health podcast like this, where we're having the conversations all over again. And I've got those, a bit like you becoming aware of your ADHD, and you kind of, now you're aware of it, like I'm aware of that is there, and I'm able to balance it much better now. But it's still so tricky. Like even this morning, we were out this morning, I was in the blue hour this morning. I got up for the blue hour this morning, and I'm just sat there on my own. I was first up. And then I was getting my phone out, and I want to catch it, and I'm going to send this to Mum. And then I was like, well, hang on a minute, just be here for me a minute. Do you know what I mean? And even on that level, I was kind of like, wow, just be here for a second.
I think it's human nature. Even it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you're the best intentions of the world, there's something in human nature that strives for that
sharing
recognition as well, though. You know, and like even something like this, you know, this podcast, we purposely called it NE1's mental health. We could have called it something else that could have been a bit vicarious that people would have got more into, but we wanted people to see what it was and listen to it for the right reasons, you know. But there's still even parts of me now, I'm like, yeah, we should be sharing this, and you're sharing it for the right reasons, but and then you're like, but I'm not that type of person.
Or it just goes onto a heap,
a
heap of things that are all kind of just pinging at a million miles an hour.
I think the community thing and the sense of belonging is really interesting. I guess I only ever hope that anything that I put out genuinely comes from my heart. And when people will look at it, they will look at it in a certain way. I think I have worried way too much what other people think. And I still do. And that is part of that thing.
Again, that's human nature, isn't it? You know?
We give ourselves so much crap for stuff. And then the more I stop doing that and like, am I happy with this? Is it good? I'm going to let it go.
Is it coming from the right place? And if you can make peace with that, you know, you're doing it for the right reasons, aren't you?
Great. Yeah. And I think, like, you know, my last 4 months weren't fantastic. They were really hard. I had good family around me. Yes, I was in New Zealand and I was doing all these different things, but a lot was changing in my life. And I just want to make sure that it's like it's not all rainbows and unicorns, you know, farting unicorns out for us as they fly off into the sunset, even though we all wish it is.
Yeah.
But that stuff, having those things go wrong, feeling that pain is really good. It feels horrendous at the time, but then afterwards, you know, you can come back and slowly start becoming more aware and reflect on it. And community and belonging is huge for me. I have spent a ton of time moving, and I could sound very ungrateful by saying that, like, but I do just sometimes wish I just want to belong in this one place.
I can level with you on that. I've felt that feeling before.
And it's horrible. Like, I can feel incredibly lonely, and loneliness is something that eats me up inside. And it can seem weird because I have these amazing friends all around the world and these different families that I like parachute into, and I'm there and it's Uncle Mike and he's doing the dishes and I'm hanging out, and we're, you know, I love that and I love to be present with those families. But it causes a lot of internal discomfort. It causes a lot of turbulence within me because I'm kind of always thinking, oh, do I belong here? Where do I belong? Where do I belong? Where do I belong? And you know, I've been away for 4 months. I've come back. I've been living in my van last year. I'll be living in my van again this year. But I had like a week and a half at my friend's house in Portobello, and it's right on the prom. It's beautiful. It's like super simple, mellow place. And it reminded me why I love that place. I got to go and see these awesome 3 ladies that we called the Sunrise Social Club. And these 3 ladies I would go out and swim with during the lockdown, and you were only meant to be with like 3 people or something. And I remember just being like, wonder if they'll be my friends. And like kind of sidling up every morning, like, hi. Yeah. And then, you know, they have become these amazing 3 women in my life. I don't see them that much, but yesterday we went and played the new fad, what's it called? The pickleball.
All right.
With them.
I've no idea.
It's basically a large ping pong bat and a kind of aerated ball. Low fence, like just whacking her and just like going having a giggle. But I've got these little communities everywhere. Yeah. And I guess I've been constantly looking for somewhere to belong. But I guess what was going on was like inside, there was still this thing where I wasn't really accepting who I am, or I'm constantly giving myself crap for it, and I never know how to say this, but like, I probably wasn't that great at giving myself self-love. I still don't think that really explains it, but I just couldn't find a bit of peace and calm.
I totally get it. When I was younger, I felt like I loved where I was from, but I sort of didn't feel like I belonged there at that particular time. And I thought I had this feeling inside of me that happiness was going to be a place for me. You know, I was going to stumble upon this place. I was going to have this feeling, and that was going to be it.
A physical place, as in like a place in the world.
A place in the world, a geographical place. And I went traveling around the world. Had a great time. What happened was, I remember I ended up in New Zealand. Fabulous place, as you well know.
Yeah.
Great community, great friends. I built up this wonderful lifestyle there. And I ended up in a really dark place. And I remember sitting, particularly looking at the ocean. And I remember thinking, I'm in the middle of nowhere here. And I realized that the turmoil was within me. It wasn't, this place hadn't caused it. I hadn't put a lot right within me. And I came home and I had to do a lot of soul searching. I had to do a lot. It's been a journey for the past 15 years. Still things I'm having to have that conversation in the mirror on a daily basis where I look at it and I go, actually, mate, no, that's on you. We've got to look at this and we've got to fix this. And what I've realized now is that the more I sort of, the self-love and healing within me, that happiness is a feeling. And it's not necessarily a place, but it can be the people I'm around and the things I'm doing. And, and it's not that it's not a silver bullet of just landing somewhere on a plane or a boat and being like, this is happiness. If there's something inside of you that isn't right, and you know, you've got to put that right, and you've got to look in the mirror and go, actually, it's a cold hard truth, but yeah,
this is my thing to deal with.
this is my thing.
This
Yeah.
is how I'm reacting to that.
And a lot of people aren't ready to do that, and they're not willing to do that as well. You know, you'll see a lot of people, and they're going through whatever struggles, and they're not willing to look in the mirror and go, actually, yeah, something within me, and I need to work on me. And it's often the hardest thing, because you know, you've got to have that. It's a really hard conversation to have with yourself, isn't it? You know,
It's terrifying.
yeah,
Like,
it is.
It really is terrifying. And I think, like, sometimes we could, there's a danger we could belittle that by the way that we're talking about things and saying this works for me. But for someone to get to that point, to start doing that thing to help themselves, something that's been really interesting for me is I've started to do the foundation training stuff, and I've been vocal online with my mental health and the things that help me with dawn days. And the more I see people and having these conversations on a one-to-one basis like this is amazing as well. But that one-to-one basis, when you notice something in a friend and working out how to contextualize it to be like, you ever thought that maybe you might,
Yeah.
or the way that I've been talking and someone goes, I go through that. I'm like, I mean, maybe you could look into it, you know, like maybe you could, how do we open it up for people? How do we help doing that? And it's having conversations, isn't it? How do we, and you know, the thing that really interests me, and this is like relationships, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Here we go. Strap in. Yeah.
I think if I think back to the past, I've totally penciled into some relationships in the hope that that person, we're going to fix each other.
Yep.
And that's really destructive for yourself and that other person, and often a lot of people around you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I don't know how much
so
more to talk about, but
Mike,
it's really hard,
Such a common
There'll
thing.
be so many people listening to this thinking exactly the same thing. I think at some point in your life, a lot of people who've had any sort of form of, I don't want to say damage, or you know, they cling on to others in the hope that they will fix that issue. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think you've got to,
or fixing someone else.
yeah, through them. Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
Really fixing yourself by.
Yeah,
which is that's my ongoing story.
You know, a little Pandora's box there, boys. But
I
think it's a really important point.
Well, that brings me to a question I want to ask you. So obviously, you mentioned you're 44. The nature of the work that you do, the journey you've been on is, you know, you're out there, you're photographing, you're videoing, you're surfing, you're traveling the world. Was there a conscious decision was it based on your work and your lifestyle that you were like a relationship was not going to be sort of solid ground, or even kids or anything like that? Was it? And as you've gotten older, have you sort of been? I imagine, like you say, back in a house, you stay in a house with a friend. They've grown into a family. You're kind of get back in the van. They're looking at you, going, "God, he's off to New Zealand, the bastard. He's living the dream," and we're kind of just doing the nuclear motion.
And I'm looking at.
Yeah, and that's that kind of dichotomy we are all in all the time, I guess.
Oh, yes, great. No, really good question. I think for a huge part of my life, I have not been that conscious. So a lot of these decisions have just happened, spur of the minute. And it's been great. I've had a ball. I've had a laugh. I've had a lot of hurt. I've probably hurt a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
But I did make a decision way back with the kids thing and I've tried to dig into it to work out what that is. And I just felt this thing where I didn't feel a need for it. Mm-hmm. Is it because I was struggling so much to just operate as a human myself that I think, how the hell am I going to deal with that?
Another common thing.
And is that fair to some child? I'm an awesome godfather, like Uncle Mike to loads of people. And I love that.
Yeah.
And I can be that energy and I can come into those places and those lives. But it has made relationships really difficult. I've had some fantastic relationships, and I regret absolutely none of those because they've taught me so much about myself and about someone else. I would rather feel love, give love, than not have felt it, I think. Some of the people around me might be like, yeah, but did you need to do this? Did you need to do that? I was like, well, I did, you know, and none of it's ever done out of malice, you know, like got a lot of love to give, want to give a lot of love. But now what I'm realizing is that the thing I need to do is not go and help someone else, not think that they're going to help me. And this, we're talking like literally in the last few weeks, I've really started to think about this and go, I need to keep my shit together, be able to talk about it, but constantly do that. And then
barriers.
Yeah, boundaries as well.
Boundaries,
isn't it?
yeah.
Learning boundaries, learning when I need space, what time I need, what, you know, like I've got a ton of energy. I can work ridiculous amounts of time, months, weeks, days, rows, hours. But do I need to do that? Like, or when can I take 15 minutes? When can I take 5 minutes? And the lady I work with is, again, I should probably explain that, like, how do I keep going? I have a lady called Isabel that I work with who, like, I don't even know how you explain what Isabel does. She's like a coach, she's a counselor, she's a business mentor. She's also ADHD and is an ADHD partner. So there's loads of brilliant relationship advice that
Do they call it a spicy relationship when there's neurodiverse?
Spicy. Yang and yang. It's just like ding, 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 ding. Yeah. And so we work on like mastery, as she calls it. Might sound like a bit of a grand title, but it's like, how can I master this life? And not to take it over and not to be like some infinite, massive, like superstar and earn less. Just how do I get it going from day to day? So she helps me, you know, we speak every 3 weeks. I pay for that, you know, in 2 chunks. So it's like I've made this investment for the half year, then the half year comes up, I make that investment for the next part of the year. And then last year I got to work with, and for anyone that's on this that's dyslexic, there is a grant called the Access to Work grant. And you can access that if you're dyslexic, and I believe ADHD. And if those things impede your work, yes, they do.
I've just been put onto this in the last 2 weeks.
Yes. So this is like, this changed my life last year. A guy called Darius from Ivy, I believe his app's called Ivy app, is a dyslexic productivity coach is what he called himself. And I think now they call it like a dyslexic or workplace strategy coach. And you can get that money, $2,500 or whatever it is. And they will then coach you for 12 weeks and teach you how to use assistive technology. So if you're Apple users, Apple Notes, Apple Reminders, and into your calendar. That might seem really simple, but actually what was going on with me was an overwhelm. So my guest gets overwhelmed because he's got a million plates spinning and he wants to do everything. How does Mike not drop the plates?
I hear you.
He's learning to take those plates and put them into a digital zone, which is called taking notes.
Yes.
I know for neurotypical people, you're like, I mean, Mike, that's taking notes. I didn't really know about that. But using things like Otter AI, so like transcription software, or using Auto Dictate, which is getting great, spewing out your thoughts, then using the AI to go, can you consolidate this down and give me the action points around the 7 different projects that I've told you I'm doing next week? Wow. It doesn't come back and go, hey, you Raj, don't do that. That's too much. It just goes squash. There you go. It goes into
chunks, bite-sized chunks that you can cope with.
Yeah. So I'm emptying this mind, which really can only have 2 things spinning at one time, but I've got 17 going. I can put them into that place. I can have that space and time in my head. And that then allows me to be less overwhelmed. If I'm less overwhelmed, I'm less anxious. If I'm less anxious, then I'm not going to push into that depression. And so this was Darius's feelings around why it's important to do this work and why it's important to help people. And it's really practical and structural. It also involves me being tidier. I'm messy. If I'm tidier, My mum said it to me the whole time. She actually loves it now that I've become tidy. She's like, I told you to have a tidy room is a tidy mind.
Tidy mind, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we've all heard that, yeah.
But yeah, like we sort of digressed a little bit there. But this thing, I think, like learning to offload the excessive amount of noise in the head is stage one for me. Then do some foundation training. For me personally, yoga, whatever your thing is, move the body, get it spinning. Then, and I have only managed to actually start meditating since I was in Mexico, just there on the way back. So what am I, 30, 40 days in? I basically was like, nah, ADHD. Like, I'm hyper. I can't meditate. It's not a thing. Found something that works for me. Found this one, it's like a transcendental meditation thing, free app called One Giant Mind. I've tried Headspace, I've tried Calm, all these different ones. For me, they're like social medias. There's choice. I don't need choice. I've got way too many choices already. And so I'm trying to do that on a daily basis. Will I fall out of it? Probably.
It's so funny what you say about choice and Headspace. So that Andy Patagonia, he does the guided meditation through Headspace. Honestly, this guy's voice is it's like hypnotic.
Amazing.
And somebody put me onto it, but somebody showed me the app, and there's just so many, and I'm like, no. So there's this 10-minute guided meditation on YouTube, and if I opened my phone now, you'd see it. And that's the one I can just go to because I know it. I know it helps us. It winds me down. That 10 minutes. I haven't got to look through 1,000 different meditations.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, and that works for me. And I've done it for the last, I think, 6 years. My mate put me onto it, and I had the exact same opinion in response. I was like, that ain't gonna work for me. You want to see what is in there, mate?
Yeah.
And he was like, give it a go. And I stuck at it, and it did help.
I had it with a couple other cranial osteopaths that I saw in the last 4 months, and this one guy, Eka, was really cool, super quiet, didn't say much, hands on the head, did the work, like, wow, body felt great. And he was like, busy mind. I was like, tell me about it. He's like, just keep it simple, but you need to start meditating. I was like, everyone talks about meditating. I'm so bored of it. Stop talking about it. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And he said, look, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Like, what you want to know is in there, but this will help you.
The magic for me is the 10-minute mark. It seems to just, I tune in, do the body scan, brings me down, but I'm not away. You know, I think that just works for me. Just sort of conscious that you might have already answered one of the questions that we ask a couple of questions to everyone that comes on the pod. One of them is, you know, what would be your tips for people's mental health and well-being that work for you? I think you've pretty much just summed that up. The other one, and it's sort of going to hark back to where you're from and your upbringing, and obviously growing up in Scotland, and you spending time in the northeast, you know this area well. They're very, very similar places, and sadly suffer from some of the same issues around mental health and well-being. Whereby, you know, Scotland has high addiction rates, has high mental health, suicide rates, and us being, you know, based in the northeast, loving where we're from, loving the people as you do with where you're from, really, really pains me to see that we are suffering with some of the highest suicide rates in the UK. And that was one of the main reasons for sort of starting this, to try and talk about it with people who, you know, love where they're from. I have been through a bit, and obviously see this issue and try and get to the bottom of why is it? Why are we suffering so badly? And, you know, what could we do different?
Yeah, you know, the suicide thing is something that's very close to home for me. I lost one of my closest friends, Jamie, like over 10 years ago. And ever since that happened, there was like this thing inside where I was like, I think it's where it started, like talk, speak, do it. don't not. You know, whoever it is that you can tap into to talk, like whoever you can trust, like do that, because it sucks to lose people. I was so angry at her for so long, but actually, really, she's probably far happier because she was so tormented. I don't think I have any answers as to why this happens, but I think like collectively just to be more compassionate in it and to have more conversations like this, but they don't have to be online. You know, that's like mates in the pub, people on the bus, you know, just keep an eye out for folk. If we could more consciously keep an eye out for folk, you know, that would probably help. Yeah, it's, yeah.
I think it's getting back to that, you know, the points we made before about community connection, and when you're talking about having conversations with people and being there, I think what we do in the Northeast, and it is the same in Scotland, that we spend a lot of time up there for work. They are quite hardy people, and they try to make a joke of everything, and they'll have banter and they'll talk about certain things, but they'll not talk about what is really the issues that's really bugging them, or you know. And I think the sooner we get over that and realize that everybody's on this roller coaster, everybody's struggling in some way, shape, or form, and it's absolutely fine to open up to your friends and have those conversations, as well as celebrating the wins. You know, I've heard, for example, you know, friends that haven't been too well, and then you hear about it months later, don't you? And say, why didn't you tell us? And I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want to.
I think that's a big one, isn't it? The burden thing.
Yeah, and you're like, well, look, your friends are meant to be there through the best times, and they're meant to be there through the worst of times, aren't they? Not just fair weather, you know. So it's not just like, I'm going to ring them and tell them you know, this is great, that's great, I've just had a promotion. Let's talk about when things are a bit shit.
Yeah.
You know, and these people, be surprised, those people that care and love for you, they will be there.
And that, the humor thing, I think I'd like to touch on that. Like, I love that side of it. Like, and, you know, in Scotland, we have a classic self-deprecating humor. The king of self-deprecating humor, Billy Connolly. You know, like, total hero.
Yeah,
but,
he's
you know, joking aside, I love how he kind of normalizes certain things. And I think finding that balance of that humor that we have, the prodding and poking with our mates that we do with love, like, and like down here, I think, you know, it's like, we're brothers and sisters from the same mothers, really, like the banter. And I wish I need to spend more time down here because it's brilliant. And so, yeah, I think it's
just cutting through that now and again, isn't it? You know, the banter and the crack. Obviously, Ray and I, we talk on building sites. We try and sort of get this conversation going within the workforce on the ground, you know, which is lads working hard. And I try and put it across, you know, we don't lose the crack. We don't lose the banter. We don't become kind of, I don't know, boring versions of ourselves, but every now and again you can spot, you know, and you can reach out and you can cut through a little bit and should we have a beer tonight? You have a coffee, or, you know, I'm down your way actually tonight. You fancy a bite to eat? Or just shelve it for a second, you know. But yeah, again, this is why we're sat here doing this, because hopefully people do hear this, you know. But I would also like to point out, like, is in a strange paradoxical way, that self-preserving trait where we don't want to burden somebody else is it's almost really kind of honourable and lovely in a weird way, where we don't want to put this deep thing we're dealing with onto somebody else, and that is such a strange human trait.
Yeah,
you know, I've been, as Ray put the question to you, when we ask this question all the time, and we think about the working class, and we're in the Northeast, you know, the coal mining and the difficult life of a northern working man from the turn of the last century, you know, and we just crack on and get on, and the crack and the banter is the lifeblood, isn't it?
It's the energy, man.
And then it's like the epigenetics of that as we stand here today in 2024. It's the identity, it's in the DNA, isn't it? And but we are getting there. The conversations are happening. We are doing it now. And Mike, wow, thank you for sharing everything you've just shared. Amazing.
Thanks for like having me on to have a blether, have a yarn, you know, like I knew I was going to have good crack with you guys, you know, that
crack the back, crack the hips,
well, cracked your back and hips, didn't I?
Jesus, cracked every bone in your body.
No, you know, the podcast that you did with Sandy was just I just loved your guys' tone. I was like, this is cool. This is the kind of conversations that need to happen. So yeah, thanks very much.
No, bless you, man. Thank you so much.
been
No,
amazing.
we absolutely loved the session that we had. Loved getting to know you and having a chat. And the last thing on Dawn Days, if people were still interested in sort of that movement, that community, and getting involved, how could they check you out?
So you could go on to my website, mikeguest.co.uk, which is currently still under construction, but it'll take you to a link.
It's one of his 153
one of my other
projects.
I've only been a photographer, 10 years, and I've still not finished my website. So you can go to Dawn Days and click on there. You can also go and look at Nick Pumphrey's work and his Dawn Days film. If you put like Mike Guest Dawn Days, Nick Pumphrey Dawn Days, there's a couple films that you can link through. They're both different films about what we did, and people are still kind of doing it. It's not like we're massively active. It's not that we've moved on, but it'll give you an idea of a way to kind of express a bit of creativity and a bit of freedom.
You can put your pictures on from the weekend, Sam.
Yeah, I'll get involved. Yeah. I was there today. It was gorgeous.
Yes, boys. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Mike.
Top
Wicked.
man.
Take care, brother.
Big love.
Peace.